Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
And I'm Joe Healy with DevilsDigest.com.
Joe, Sun Devil football is finally back. Spring practice starts this week.
Getting our first glimpse of this 2024 Sun Devil football squad. And Brad, no good deed goes unpunished. So for y'all watching and listening, Brad and I, we already did this show. Like, we put this together. We had our preview. We did it about, we're going to get ahead of the game. We're going to do about a week in advance, have it ready to go. And then a very important bit of information came through the shoots just a couple days ago. So, you know what? We're going to give you guys like our 2.0 version of our spring preview. So we're going to use a little bit more updated information, give you our best.
Absolutely. And also in that span, I had a chance to talk to some coaches, even further information as well. So, yeah, with the most updated look at the 2024 Sun Devil spring roster, as we'll take a position-by-position look, highlighting the key battles, some of the guys that have a great opportunity ahead of them, some that might be feeling the pressure. And a little bit later on, we're going to be talking to a couple of Sun Devil coaches, get their in-depth take on their positions, starting with running back coach Shaun Aguano, and then a little bit later on, cornerbacks coach Brian Carrington. But before we dive into all that, Joe, some news that has been met with, I'd say maybe mostly negative. Maybe there's perhaps some silver linings to it. ASU's road game at Texas State, originally scheduled for Saturday, September 14th, is now moved up a couple days to Thursday, September 12th. The reason cited, of course, is to be is TV related. Sounds like they're making some adjustments at the behest of ESPN. So just 5 days after ASU hosts an SEC opponent in Mississippi State, they'll be hitting the road to take on the Bobcats.
And I can take a little bit of blame, I think, for lightly cursing this situation. I saw in the huddle on DevilsDigest.com that same day. I believe that there was something about a Utah game that became Friday, if I'm not mistaken, or something along those lines. And then I made a post of like, hey, awesome. That's the only non-Saturday game. ASU's not going to have any Thursday games here in 2024. And like less than an hour later, this news comes through. So
we got the Joe Healy schedule curse now too.
It's expanding to baseball schedules. Nothing is off limits. So sorry for that one, but yeah, it's because that's the kind of thing that I think a lot of fans might have thought was unique to the Pac-12, or that ASU would be escaping now that it's out of the Pac-12, or obviously will be out of the Pac-12 next football season, and of course talking about those Thursday games, but those will remain. You can't take those out of our lives, apparently. So yeah, as you mentioned, that's bumped up a few days. It's a solid Texas State team that was pretty good last year. ASU's non-conference schedule is a beast. Obviously, we'll talk that over as the months come about. So that's a short week on the front end, but obviously gives you a little bit more time on that back end before your next opponent.
Yeah, ASU will then open up Big 12 play the following week in Lubbock, facing off against Texas Tech. And I did see somebody point out, I forget who, so sorry for the not giving credit, but I did see somebody out there on the social media sphere point out a good silver lining, that with the game on Thursday, that gives the coaching staff Friday night lights in Texas to go do some recruiting.
Yeah, and you can't beat that. I mean, that's about as good as it gets. You're talking about high school ball in the state of Texas. So, if ASU is going to be, I'm curious to see, though. I'm sure they'll have guys all over the place. Obviously San Marcos, not terribly far from the Austin area, not too terribly far from Dallas-Fort Worth area. So, you can make a little drive and you can hit those major areas of Texas. So I'm sure they're going to use that to their advantage.
All right, so now let's dive into our spring preview, taking a position-by-position look. Starting at quarterback, which, as Joe mentioned, was the catalyst for this 2.0 version of the spring preview, as Jaden Rashada will not participate throughout most of spring, if at all, as with a hand-thumb injury on his right hand, of course, his throwing arm, for an injury suffered a while back. There was some optimism that perhaps he would be able to kind of resume some stuff a little bit later on in the spring, near the end of April. But when I talked to Marcus Arroyo, ASU's offensive coordinator, he did say that there's, obviously the physical limitations in terms of the hand, but he still expects Jaden Rashada to do a lot of the mental reps and kind of running around and everything, just not be thrown, which obviously throws a huge kind of wrench into the three-way quarterback battle that was set to take place between Rashada, Trenton Bourguet, and newcomer Sam Levitt.
Yeah, and we'll see what sort of true impact or ripple effect this has. I think logically, you got to expect that this battle is still going to go into the fall. Probably would have even if Rashada were 100% healthy for the spring. This just doesn't have the makeup of a position battle that's going to be locked down in just a couple of weeks. I was really curious to see how those reps would be shared. It's really hard to get a true glimpse of if there's a preferred starter or an incumbent starter. Obviously, Rashada was QB1 to start the year. He had those few starts at the start and end of the season. Trent Bourguet got quite a bit of time. Obviously, there were a lot of guys that started at quarterback for ASU last year. So, like I said, it's going to be something that I don't anticipate there to be too much closure or significant separation in the spring. But then the opportunity is going to be there. You have those two guys that are going to be competing, at least on the field, and Trent Bourguet and Sam Levitt. And, if something happens and you get someone that's just really locked in, that's an opportunity for those two to try to do their best to create that separation, even if folks like us don't necessarily expect that to happen.
Yeah, so it should be really interesting because obviously we've seen what Trenton Bourguet has meant to this program, both on and off the field over the last few seasons. And Sam Levitt's coming in from Michigan State, a former four-star prospect in the 2023 class, just like Jaden Rashada did. He has tremendous arm talent there. And also Marcus Arroyo and Kenny Dillingham both said that Navi Bruzon, the walk-on true freshman who played here locally at Liberty High School, kind of almost a Trenton Bourguet-like career path of just won a ton, set all kinds of records in the prep ranks, but just of smaller stature, and so perhaps got a little bit overlooked on the recruiting front. But I know that the program, the people, our folks in the program are very excited to see what he's been able to bring to the on the field and off the field over these first couple months there. So he'll have a chance to shine as well. But yeah, it should be an interesting race to see if either of these two guys can set themselves up really well. But I agree, this is something that's the ultimate QB1 question is going to be something that's going to be for fall camp.
Yep, for sure. But, it's a great opportunity, like I said, for those who will be competing to make the absolute most of it. Of course, there is a significant experience difference between Bourguet and Levitt. Now, Levitt's an athletic quarterback. He got a little bit of run. He played in a few games, Michigan State last year, maintained that red shirt. He did a little rushing. I was just kind of looking at the numbers just a couple of days ago, and, he had a couple nice runs. It's a small sample because he didn't get a lot of time, but I think he might bring an athletic presence, a little bit different from what Bourguet does, but there's just no, substitute or replacement for, 5-6 years of team experience. I mean, Bourguet's been on this team, I believe, since 2019. I'd have to imagine at this point he's one of, if not the longest tenured players on the roster, along with guys like Anthony Cooper and that sort of thing. So that's a big deal. But they're all, there is a bit of a fresh start, of course, with that new offensive coordinator, Marcus Arroyo. So even though there's, you're not going to have that one integral piece in the battle in Jaden Rashada, still going to be a lot to watch this spring. Again, even if we think it may not come to a close in terms of selecting a quarterback or really having a distinct, pecking order depth chart, still a lot to keep an eye on.
Yeah, the Marcus Arroyo factor is an interesting one as well, because obviously he's a newcomer and doesn't necessarily have loyalty to one guy or the other. So it looks like that it's going to be a pretty clean slate for all guys involved. And I sat down with him yesterday at ASU, and for folks, check it out on the Speak of the Devils feeds. He gave some great insight into how he's going to be running this quarterback competition, kind of splitting up the reps, but also just splitting up kind of the personnel groupings. Not necessarily maybe a first team, second team, but just trying to get a sense of where these guys are in terms of leaders, how their teammates respond to them. Obviously, those intangible qualities are so crucial when it comes to, a successful quarterback. So these two guys are going to have an opportunity, obviously, with Bourguet having kind of the institutional knowledge that he has, as you mentioned, over those 5-6 years here in Tempe. But, a guy like Sam Levitt, was brought in for a reason. And Kenny Dillingham is been known as a quarterback whisperer, and Marcus Arroyo helped develop Justin Herbert into the all-world quarterback that he is. So it should be a fun show to watch over these 5 weeks.
That's for sure. We'll see. Who knows? Maybe Sam Levitt could be that Taylor Kelly. That's the example that we always give, and it's a viable one. It's a guy that was maybe third at best on the depth chart after the spring, skyrocketed up in the fall, became QB1, and then wrote a lot of records and won a lot of games for Arizona State. So you just can never count guys out, especially when you have a lot of different variables, whether it's injuries or players that are new or new coaches, new schemes. Crazy things can happen.
All right, so whoever wins that job or whoever's battling for that job will have the benefit of handing the ball off to a very talented group of running backs, headlined, of course, by the returners in Cam Scatteraboo and the now healthy DeCarlos Brooks. But also a very exciting X factor has joined that group in Raleek Brown.
Yeah, I mean, and those guys are pretty exciting. I mean, if you look at the numbers, ASU didn't do a great deal as far as like rushing yardage last year. I think they only averaged a little over like 110 yards per game, something like that. But the yards per carry among those top guys was pretty good, in that 4.5 to 5 yards per carry range. They're just guys that were banged up. Obviously, Brooks missed a lot of time. Scatteraboo was kind of on a pitch count, I think, for, a good chunk of the season. So you get these guys back and healthy and all working together, and that's something impressive. Obviously, we know Scat. He was the literal do-it-all guy. I think, as fun and cool as it is to see some of the things he was doing, I think we can all agree we'd like to maybe take a few things off his plate, like the punting and the starting quarterback stuff. That would, I think, be nice to leave to maybe the true professionals, though I'm sure that Arroyo and Dillingham are still going to get weird and crazy and do some trick plays for sure. So I'm fairly confident we're going to see Cam Scatteraboo throwing the ball, or at least, lining up under center at some points this season. But, man, that's a guy that obviously proved that he can do it at this level, coming up from FCS to FBS, and I think the best is yet to come for him. DeCarlos Brooks, man, really liked what I saw out of him in a relatively small sample, especially that Washington State game. I mean, if he could bottle that up, put that together, he could play football for a very long time with that 3 touchdown day that he had. You also have Kyson Brown coming back, of course. He played a good amount as a true freshman last year, but you talked about Raleek Brown, and that's someone that might be the newcomer, and there are many of them on this 2024 roster that I'm the most excited about. This guy had 5-star credentials. I think he was like a top 25 overall recruit a couple years ago, the #1 all-purpose back in the country, according to Rivals. Got a good run at USC in his year and a half basically that he was there. I think it's just something that's a guy that they turned into a wide receiver. He's a running back, and he knows that, and that's what he wants to be. So ASU is going to give him that opportunity, and they're going to use him creatively, I'm sure. So that's someone that I think, months from now, a year from now, we're going to be looking back and saying that guy was a difference maker.
Yeah, very talented options back there, and with Brown being kind of more of the explosive, game-breaking type, and then a couple of like battering rams and Brooks and Scatteraboo. It's a nice arsenal of weapons for Shaun Aguano, and can't forget Kyson Brown, who contributed as a true freshman, more of that explosive type of back. And George Hart is coming back for another year, another veteran in that room as well. And of course, over the summer, Jason Brown will be coming in, a 4-star guy out of the Pacific Northwest. But even now, even without that 4-star talent there, a lot of really exciting options at running back as well. And moving on to wide receiver, unfortunately, some of the top guys are a little banged up. Xavier Guillory will be out all of spring ball per Kenny Dillingham as he's coming back from an injury. Now, Elijah Badger, who, longtime listeners might remember our sit down with him at the Burrito Express opening a couple months back, of course, injured late last season, has been rehabbing that. Kenny Dillingham did not rule him out, but there might be some limitations we will see come the first practice on Tuesday. But as a wide receiver one, you kind of know what you have in Elijah Badger, and he's a guy that has been wanting to step up and assume more on his plate. So it seems like the mental off-field stuff is really starting to blossom, as well as obviously his phenomenal play on the field. But overall, even with Guillory, and if Badger is limited to a degree, there's still a lot of very intriguing options in this group, Joe.
Yeah, that's for sure. And, a guy like Badger, he's been around for years, and he's, I think he has something like 130, 135 receptions over the last 2 seasons. So, if there's somebody that I guess can afford to miss a little time and probably not take a big step back, it's a guy like that. he's someone that's got that 1,000-yard potential if the offense can be clicking the right way. But as you mentioned, if either or both of those guys are out or limited or just, not on the field on a very consistent basis this spring, opens up the door for quite a few players. And it's kind of like that next level, the ones that I'm, next level, like a little bit down, that I'm really intrigued to see. Guys like Troy O'Meary, he showed some flashes last year. Melquan Stovall, very experienced receiver. He had well over 100 receptions for his career before coming to ASU last year. The one I'm most intrigued about is, a story that I'm sure all Sun Devil fans are hoping will have, a bit of a happy continuation and then ultimate ending starting this season. That's for Jake Smith. Most folks, I'm sure, who are watching and listening to this know his story and just how wronged he was by the NCAA, along with all the others who were prevented from playing last year after being 2-time transfers, even though the NCAA just, like 2-3 months later, completely flipped things around and allowed that during basketball season, which is obviously a good and right decision for them to have made, but they should have never been in that position to have to change that decision in the first place. But putting that gripe aside, getting Jake Smith back on the field for the first time, I believe in 3-4 years, something like that, as far as actual on-field action, is going to be something I'm sure that Jake is chomping at the bit to get out there, to be playing, to do his thing again, and to show the world that he can still do this. Coming out of high school, out of Notre Dame Prep in Scottsdale, it was the National Player of the Year, not state, national. So this is a guy that's got some major upside. He's been on the sideline for far too long, so I can only imagine how excited he is to get out there this spring.
Yeah, it's been he's had to sit out 3 seasons. Injury a couple years ago, then 2 seasons ago, the situation at USC. Then, of course, as you mentioned, the NCAA tomfoolery that kept him, Xavier Alford, and so many others unjustly off the field. But he was able to practice and did contribute a lot in the scout team. And from what we were able to see during the practices when he was healthy, really fast, really explosive, and you see why he was, such a highly regarded prospect coming out of Notre Dame Prep. Another guy that's going to have a chance, and we got to see a little bit last year as he was coming back from an ACL injury, was Jordan Tyson, the Colorado transfer. He's a guy that can add some big-time playmaking potential to this room as well. So I'm really excited to see what Jordan, who, by the coaching staff's on a mission, they're just trying to get some knock of the rust off during his appearances last year. But now in spring, he's starting to get back to that full explosive playmaker that we saw for Colorado and the ASU fans saw against the Devils a couple years ago. He's has some big-time potential, and along with some of the more veteran guys you mentioned in Stovall and Troy O'Meary, a big body target. What I really like is the diversity in the room in terms of you have some guys that are big body, some guys who are more maybe the coming out of the slot, some guys who project more as downfield. You have a little bit of everything with this group, and even some young guys like Caleb Black, who saw some good run last season as well. Corbin Hendricks is another youngster that is got the coaching staff pretty excited about his future. And altogether, I think you have a lot of very good targets for whoever ultimately is behind center.
Yeah, Jordan Tyson has the potential to be very, very special. Sun Devil fans might remember when ASU played at Colorado in 2022, and he led ASU won that game. That was that coming out party for Trenton Bourguet and Jalen Conyers and all that stuff. I think it was that first game that Shaun Aguano took over play calling duties that year. But Jordan Tyson lit up ASU. You look at his numbers. If you check the stats that he had, he suffered that injury late in the season in November of 2022, but his final 3 games of that year, he averaged well over 100 receiving yards per game. I mean, the guy was really getting it done. He is a deep ball threat, some major speed. So this guy, I know we've said this about players in the past, and sometimes it's been somewhat accurate, and sometimes we've missed on it, but he has the potential to be like that Frank Darby kind of downfield threat. Now, obviously, that's a high bar. I was going to throw out like Brandon Ayuk as well, but that's obviously at this point a tremendous compliment for a football player when he's one of the best young receivers in the NFL right now. But Tyson has that ability to be that game-breaking downfield guy because he's already proven it at Colorado.
So moving on to the tight end position now, obviously a lot of change from last season. Most of the top of the depth chart is gone. Jalen Conyers, of course, will be facing ASU as a Texas Tech, a Red Raider. Messiah Swinson is gone as well. But that opens up the door for a guy that has Sunday potential, at least per position coach Jason Mons and Bryce Pierre, who learned the value of patience over the course of his career with going the junior college route, kind of converting from a big wide receiver to a tight end, learning just life, what is like in the trenches as well, and really kind of learning to love the nitty gritty and kind of the blue collar aspects of the position. A guy who's just as excited to lay a pancake block on somebody as make a big catch. But he's not the only guy that, even though he is the presumed starter in this tight end position group, a couple of other transfers that are coming in from the FBS level. Marcuston Douglas is coming over from Florida State, got some good run for a very good Seminole squad, and Mike Norvell. And Cam Harpole is coming over from San Diego State, a guy with a lot of athleticism and some good receiving upside.
Yeah, going on Bryce Pierre, mentioned it with Jake Smith about someone that you really want to see have some vindication, have their story have a positive and happy conclusion to it at the collegiate level. Bryce Pierre is a guy that falls into that category for different reasons. Obviously, he wasn't sidelined for several years due to injury like Jake Smith has been. But you really have to tip your cap and be, proud of and appreciate a guy who just continues to work. Those stories like a Mike Bercovici. I always think back to the Jail Mary, the post-game interview, Todd Graham talking about how, Mike Bercovici could have transferred. He would have missed out on the greatest night of his life, something like that. Bryce Pierre is someone that is waited his turn, worked, adapted to this level, taken on some new skills, and he's in line now to be that top tight end. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of accolades being thrown his way by the coaching staff as far as, what he might be doing with his life this time next year in terms of preparing for an NFL future. So that's very much on the table there. And you talk about Marcuston Douglas, man, like that dude, I think, is just a few, burrito express meals or spaghetti shack meals away from being like an offensive tackle. But the dude's crazy athletic. He's 6'5", 280, and he can move. So that's something really intriguing there. And as you mentioned, Cam Harpole. The coaching staff's high on him. So all three of those guys certainly should get run. I mean, you think about last year, you had Conyer, Swinson, and Pierre, all getting time. So even though there is, of course, a shift in offensive coordinator, you still get the impression that these three guys should be seeing the field quite a bit.
And moving off to over to the offensive line, a place that has a lot of question marks is Lee Fatanu is coming back after a strong Sun Devil debut at center. And then you got a whole lot of question marks in terms of also what's happening at left tackle with Bram Walden, who played well at times during his appearances last year. He unfortunately will be sidelined throughout spring, but kind of maybe going left to right a little bit at that left tackle spot. ASU did bring in some experienced guys and some guys with some good pedigree. Josh Atkins is coming over after starting 13 games for Hawaii at left tackle a season ago, and Jalen Clem. Very familiar name, and for those folks in the offensive line circles, he is coming down to battle for that starting job after spending time at Washington. Yeah,
those are two big pickups. Atkins, as you mentioned, was a full season starter at Hawaii. I believe he began his career at Houston. So those are two that could factor in, especially Atkins. I mean, that's a guy that wouldn't be a massive surprise if he's a starting offensive lineman for this team, and especially obviously during the spring when you have Walden out, and then you have others, like Emmett Boley suffered that horrible injury at the beginning of last year, but he got an extra year of eligibility, so he's going to be in the fray as well. Max Hanichur, ones that have gotten experience last year. So it's interesting at tackle, and there are a lot of other names to add to this mix for sure. But and it's a common theme for tackle and guard. Again, pretty much everybody but center, where Fatanu has that spot locked down. You've got a lot of names, a lot of guys who got starting experience last year because of how much shuffling ASU had to do due to injuries. They also brought in a handful of transfers, whether it's a young guy like Clem who has some high, pedigree, but hasn't really gotten a ton of time, or others that have a substantial amount of starting experience. So you look at this list. I mean, it's a long list of scholarship guys. So there's no shortage of pieces for this staff to work with to try to find a group of five that can really protect for this team.
Yeah, the tackle battles are going to be really intriguing, and obviously glad to see Emmett Boley coming back, and he's been participating in the offseason conditioning program. He was cleared about a month ago, so good to see him back in there because he had won that starting right tackle job, and he has frame and size that you just simply can't teach. But we're also going to start to see some guys like Ben Coleman, who is probably going to be ASU's left guard starter a season ago, but before he was unfortunately injured in the offseason. And he was able to practice a little bit late in the season, didn't get to appear in games, but finally the Sun Devils will get to see him in the trenches there. You have a guy with over 30 career starts in the Pac-12 on his resume. Shaun Aguano was very impressive and kind of being thrown to the wolves a little bit as a true freshman, something that typically most offensive linemen aren't asked to do. And he saw time at guard and, of course, perhaps infamously at left tackle when Isaiah Glass quit the team and he was was moved to the left tackle spot on the flight to Salt Lake City. Acquitted himself really well as an emerging as a team leader. And Issei Matatia, from New Mexico, a guy with over 20 career starts on his resume. So while you have, you mentioned the center spot you feel great about, but you have some good options there on the interior as well. Joey Sua, the Arkansas transfer, of Phoenix native in his own right, he has experience at guard and tackle as well. So and Cade Briggs also should mention him. So a veteran presence as well after playing a good amount of time for the Sun Devils and at Texas Tech prior to that. Some very good pieces that I think there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching along the lines in spring.
Yeah, that's what I was just basically going to say, is that you have some versatile guys, some guys that can play multiple positions, that have played multiple positions. Some, like Na'a, more maybe by force than by choice. I'm really intrigued to see where Na'a fits in, what his best spot is. But yeah, you've got several guys that have, again, either experience or credentials or both. The goal here is just to elevate the offensive line. It's going to take a lot of work for it to be a team strength, and I think that's a pretty lofty goal. But you just want to steer it away from being a problem, and the injuries caused that last year. You got to get consistency, continuity, and health. It's just tough when you're shuffling so many guys around, different positions, different starters, just the different lineups and combinations they had. I mean, that's a nightmare for any coach to have to deal with. But they've got a lot now, and so. What I'm curious to see again is, what's it going to take? How long is it going to take, for them to really find a stable five? You talked about how you can do some mixing and matching. And they definitely have the ability to do that given the players that they have. But with the offensive line, I think more than any position group on a football team, you really want to get that core group together so that they can gel and mold together and not have this turnstile of, okay, today this guy's going to be the left tackle. Okay, tomorrow he's going to be the right guard. Okay, the next day we're moving the center to right tackle. I mean, I remember years in the past, like ASU under different coaching staff would intentionally do that for some practices just to kind of see what guys can do, which is, I don't know, I'm not a coach, but I thought that was kind of odd. Like, why don't you train the guys where they're going to be? So that's going to be something, again, for me, I'm going to be very interested to see as you go through, the spring practices, are you going to get to a point quickly where you see the same five guys going, or are you going to just see a lot of mixing and matching over the course of those few weeks?
Switching over to the defensive line, a couple of very notable departures in B.J. Green off to Colorado and Deshaun Mallory off to Sundays in the NFL, hopefully. But still, you got to feel pretty good about the ASU's defense up front, especially with some of the additions they made over the offseason, kind of starting off at the edge spots. You feel pretty good about Clayton Smith and Prince Torba as ascending to your starting tackles. Smith is a guy who was a former five-star recruit and really kind of was able to get going later in the year. He set some lofty goals, but as Brian Ward, the DC, said, he played a little bit of light and maybe struggled in terms of just finding the ideal playing weight. He's in a much better spot in that area now. Prince Torba, coming out of the gate, 6 sacks in 6 games. Unfortunately, was kind of nagged by injuries down the stretch, a dislocated elbow there. But those two guys getting ready to go. Then you have some good depth in Elijah O'Neal, a JUCO transfer, really kind of flashed when he was given some opportunities last year. Roman Petrie from Purdue is a guy that the staff is really high on. Tremendous length, kind of that has that kind of prototypical modern edge rusher build. And then kind of the annual question, is this going to be the year that Garen Stansbury is able to kind of make good on his wealth of physical talents and tools, but is he going to be able to put it all together?
I really like that starting pair of Smith and Dorba. You want to see them advance from last year to this year, but what you saw last season, I was very, impressed by, very intrigued by. I thought they were very good pickups. Elijah O'Neal is one that I'm really, really curious to see. Can he become a difference maker in this lineup? Last year you had BJ Green in that mix. When you're talking about Green, Dorba, and Clayton Smith, you kind of had that trio of guys that was really making an impact. If they can do a similar thing this year and basically have O'Neal be a part of that rotation. As you mentioned, obviously he got playing time last year quite a bit, but he was somebody coming out of the JUCO level that I thought could be, big time difference maker. So he's one that I'm certainly hoping can make a big leap from year one to year two. And yeah, a guy like Stansbury, he's been around for a while. He kind of falls into that category of those guys that Herm Edwards and staff brought in of, the physical measurables and that whole thing that they had with their recruiting and assessments and evaluations. But yeah, the opportunity is there, but as the years go on, it's basically time to really contribute.
Moving on inside, I think one of the big headlines here is whether CJ Fight is kind of going to be ready to be the guy at one of the defensive tackle spots. Tremendous upside, obviously the Texas to Tempe connection going strong there, and was earned some playing time last season and did well and acquitted himself well. Now, obviously, much bigger things ahead for him, and another guy who's on the young side, but also emerging as a team leader. Tristan Munday, the former Saguaro Sabercat, played at Wisconsin before transferring back last year. He'll be in that mix as well, but ASU did add some very talented options to the interior as well. Jeff Clark's coming over from Louisville, J.P. Dieter from Purdue, and a guy that I think we're both really interested and intrigued by, and Jacob Kungaika from the University of Arizona. He's a guy that just, like, if you've seen some of the stuff that ASU has put on social media from the kind of the offseason lifting sessions, this dude's strong.
Yeah, the additions that they made, I'm very impressed by. If you're keeping in mind, I want to word this the right way, kind of limitations. Obviously we know that ASU is trying to work its way up to be a player in the game and to be able to appeal to high caliber transfers and recruits, but that takes work. So, within the realm of what ASU is working with right now, I thought that they did a very good job on the acquisitions that were made. You still got Anthony Cooper around, but man, Jacob Kungaika really is someone that I think can be a difference maker. We'll see if ASU can kind of go 3 for 3 in terms of adding high quality transfer interior linemen, like guys that are NFL material. You go back, you got Nesta Jade Silvera year before last, and then you got Deshaun Mallory last year. So if the Lightning can strike 3 times, that would be outstanding. But at least on the surface, and you're looking at the roster and the names that are there, the bodies that are in the room. Again, you got to be impressed by the depth that they've accrued. And you're hopeful that these players can really put it together. And again, I think that there's reason for intrigue, and you've got some other younger players that they're adding depth. There are a lot of guys on the defensive line, so it's going to be a battle this spring.
Yeah, and you mentioned Anthony Cooper, the wily veteran, and I think with some of the additions on the defensive tackle front, that allows him to probably play some more in his more natural position on the end, but also has that versatility. Justin Watley, the Cincinnati transfer, is a guy that also has that versatility. He can play inside, he can play outside. He's about 275 pounds, so that offers that versatility as well. So new defensive line coach Deron Reynolds gonna have some fun there, but also it's gonna be big competition for these guys. This is a spot on the defensive line that's probably a little heavy right now in terms of the scholarship numbers. So in terms of the post-spring attrition, this is a good opportunity for guys to kind of make their mark. Moving on to linebacker, Joe, I know this is an area that you're extremely excited about, and for good reason as well. Major facelift here for A.J. Cooper's group. Tate Romney, Caleb McCullough are two of the guys that are coming back. Romney, I thought, had a great season, kind of just breaking out after his transfer from BYU as one of the Sun Devil starters. Caleb McCullough did really well when his number was called. But I think it's really a trio of transfers that has this group potentially being a dark horse contender for maybe one of the deepest in the team.
It's really interesting to look at the linebacker group over the last year and how it's transformed and what it's become, what it is now. I mean, golly, you look back to last year, and the guys in the mix to start, were supposed to be, of course, Trey Brown, and Trey Brown had a very good year in his 1 year at ASU. That was a great pickup last year from Washington State, but obviously his college career is over. Then you had Will Schaefer, and we know the story with Will as far as opting to transfer at an early point. And then you had the whole Juwan Mitchell fiasco. That guy was supposed to factor in as well. I mean, we weren't even talking about really Caleb McCullough or Tate Romney as being starting caliber players, to be at this point last year, like the spring and even going into fall camp. It just kind of came about by all those different things that happened, those dominoes that fell with other linebackers. So then you move into the season and you got those guys that are, playing the majority of the time together, especially Romney. Obviously he was a starter for pretty much the whole season, and he put together a hell of a year. And I thought McCullough was solid as well. So those guys weren't, slouches. They weren't. It didn't strike me as a massive weakness of the team, but ASU still went out. The coaches went out and they made some major upgrades in the transfer market. You're getting Cyrus Fiaseo from San Diego State, the team MVP, leading tackler, leading in a handful of other defensive categories as well. Keyshawn Elliott from a good New Mexico State team, I think well over 100 tackles. Again, these are like, team leader, team captain, all conference caliber players. You also get Jordan Crook, who played a lot for Arkansas, some SEC ball, and he was a good recruit as well. So they added, these 3 transfers, and they also have Kavion Thunderbird, who was a pretty high profile recruit last year, a redshirt freshman coming in this season. So, you've got a lot of pieces, and especially for a defense that typically only runs 2 linebackers out there. You want to talk about competition and iron sharpening iron and the cream rising to the top, or whatever cliches you want to use about it. This is going to be real interesting to keep an eye on.
A lot of good competition there, as you said, and I think also a lot of cross training between guys learning the Mike and the Will positions and having that versatility and kind of being able to mix and match in a number of ways. So that second level of defense figures to be a really fun one for the Devils. And now finishing off in the secondary, kind of break this up kind of by position group. Starting off, perhaps let's go at nickel, where Jordan Clark was holding down that position for the Devils for the last several years, but his departure to Notre Dame and greener pastures there opens the door for a very intriguing, perhaps was going to be a 2-man race, but now it looks like it's going to be a third contender as well. Mason Williams I thought did really well, kind of in his opportunities and backing up Jordan at the nickel spot a season ago. Cole Martin coming in from Oregon, the former 4-star recruit from Basha High School here in the Valley, made a pick against the Sun Devils as well to drive that point home. But he's a guy that's really impressed and is really kind of winning folks over with his football intelligence and his off-field intangibles as well. But also Keith Abney, who's also going to still can see time at corner as well. He's a guy as a true freshman from Texas. Really kind of hit the ground running, made his mark in fall camp, and continued and got some playing time during the year. And he is a guy that is positioned to be, I think, a very key contributor somewhere in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that, and man, that's some competition. Again, these things that open your eyes, and it's going to be a battle between them. Mason Williams is one of those players that's been around for a long time. Maybe not a real household name, but he's just, he's been around, he's stuck around, and he's contributed, as you said. Cole Martin has some major upside. That was a big get for ASU. I mean, he played in every game for, an Oregon team that was obviously very good last year, and I thought was going to make a run into the college football playoffs. So as a true freshman doing that shows you something. So he's one. I mean, that's going to be a battle. But Keith Abney's also a guy, that came in with some high expectations. So we're going to see, and you're going to see this pretty much throughout the secondary. I mean, you're going to have some major position battles because you have guys that are qualified to start that go 2 to 3 deep. The depth, there isn't a huge drop off from 1 to 2 or even 3 in a lot of these positions in the secondary. Obviously, that adds depth, allows you to rotate, allows you to keep guys fresh and healthy and replace injured players before the spring coming up. That obviously heats up those battles to something fierce.
Let's move on to corner and talking about those battles. And Abney, of course, is going to be in the mix there. It's where he saw time a season ago. But Ed Woods, the wily veteran, kind of like Mason Williams, just a guy who's been here, came over from the prior coaching staff and has really put together some good work. A guy who earned starts down the back half of the season and kind of assuming a starting role opposite NFL-bound Roe Torrance. Those two guys are bringing the kind of the institutional knowledge. Countez Bradley is another big-bodied returning guy, a young corner as well. But a couple of high-profile transfers should be very heavily in the mix for, and they came here with the intention to start, so it's going to be a good battle. LaTerrence Welch, a former top 200 national recruit who spent the part of his career at LSU, now coming to Tempe, and Javon Robinson, who spent time at Washington State. Very familiar with this defensive scheme as well, has that institutional knowledge, from a schematic standpoint. So I think right now when you have Woods, Abney, Welch, and Robinson in that mix, I think you have 4 really good guys that are going to make for a hell of a battle for those 2 starting corner spots.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued to see what Welch brings. I mean, you just look at the on paper, elements about him, and you can't help but be impressed. He was a top tier recruit, has great size, played for LSU, got some run there. I mean, if you're going to that program, you're doing something right. So that's someone that I think really could be a difference maker if things come together for him. And then you go beyond, a level deeper. You've got a bunch of true freshmen, many of which are here for the spring, that are high-profile people. Rodney Bamaj, Blaz Johnson, Chris Johnson, Tony Lewis and Kuba. I mean, you've got I know we're talking about the names, these ones that have been around for years and years, like the Ed Woods of the world and things like that. But you got some youngsters that are going to be hungry to compete as well. So again, broken record here, just a lot of depth, a lot of hungry athletes, and we'll see what comes out the other end, because that competition is going to be pretty fierce.
Yeah, Brian Carrington has some good options. There'll be some tough choices also in his future. You mentioned Tony Lewis and Kuba, one of the four-star members of ASU's incoming recruiting class. He'll also see some opportunities at safety, but might be a harder field to row at safety, because there's a lot of very talented and experienced players ahead of him on that depth chart, starting with reigning ASU team MVP Shamari Simmons, who made a big-time splash coming up from the FCS level a season ago. He returns as a starter. Xavier Alford, I mean, that's a guy that just, you mentioned, Joe, just was kind of like with Jake Smith, screwed over by the NCAA, but was in line prior to that decision to be a absolutely critical piece of this ASU defense. He's free and clear. He's chomping at the bit, ready to go. Montana Warren, who was also going to be a contributor at safety as a true freshman a season ago before an unfortunate broken collarbone suffered at Camp Tonazona. He'll be in that mix. Miles Rouser is another very productive member of that New Mexico State defense a season ago, a former Michigan commit and four-star prospect. And then Kamari Wilson, who played a couple of years at Florida as a former blue chip recruit as well. Man, there's a lot of quality depth, and you hope that it's an iron sharpens iron, and that with the depth at corner and at safety, that no matter what kind of rotation might develop, that there's not going to be a drop off no matter who's out there.
And I mean, you just talked about five guys, all of which could be starting at a lot of schools, and ASU's got them all in the same position room. Shamari Simmons was just absolutely blown away, tremendously impressed by what he put together last year. It's great that he's got another year of eligibility. I mean, that guy can play. Xavier Alford, you just obviously can tell by now. We've heard from him how hungry he is to get back on the field, and he was very good at USC. This guy is proven talent. Kamari Wilson was a high-tier recruit. Miles Rouser was somebody that contributed a lot at New Mexico State. And Montana Warren, as you mentioned, he was really putting on a show before he got hurt last year. So that's five guys that are just going to be battling with one another. And you really feel, again, excited about that group. And, it's similar to the defensive line, because you look at these transfer portal pickups. Now, obviously, four of those five are Montana Warren is the only one who's, only spent his time at the Arizona State. But this year, you get Kamari Wilson and Miles Rouser, and those are two good pickups. So, again, these safety spots, that is going to be like a lunch pail thing every single day, every single rep. You got to bring it, because there are going to be guys nipping at your heels with the ability to contribute. So you talk about that iron sharpening iron. That's exactly what this shapes up to be in the way that I see it.
All right, so moving on to special teams real quick. This could be a TBD situation till the summer and fall camp. You have some returning guys, and kicker Carson Kiefer. Ian Hershey is a guy who came over from Idaho State as a kicker, saw time last year with the Sun Devils as a punter, and obviously Charlie Regal knows him pretty well from their time with the Bengals, and they're kind of careful about his allotment to maintain his eligibility in terms of being able to have some extra years as well. But over the summer, you're expecting a very experienced kicker in Parker Lewis, who has spent time at USC, was their starter for a while, most recently at Ohio State as well. Kenyon Floyd, a very heralded local punter as well. So the special teams unit, even though this is kind of everybody's new, with Dario Longetto, Slater Zellers, and Josh Carlson all departing, is going to see a whole lot of turnover, but the picture might not start to really truly take shape for a couple months.
Yeah, I'd say the main storyline that really stands out to me is maybe if Ian Hershey can impress the staff, especially at punter, because you're talking about Floyd likely being that option as far as those fall arrivals. Very talented player, still a freshman. So again, if Hershey can get any sort of advantage in that capacity, then that's going to be a big deal. He punted pretty well, especially just with all the problems ASU had punting last year. When he got out there, it was kind of a breath of fresh air, for the most part. So we'll see again if that's something that puts together any sort of storyline over the course of the spring. But obviously, wouldn't be shocked if those two fall arrivals that you mentioned are the guys for this year. That probably makes a lot of sense too.
All right, so before we talk to some Sun Devil assistant coaches, let's crank out a couple of categories here where obviously spring is a time of great opportunity. Some guys can take advantage. We've seen some other guys put on a good show and not ultimately follow through. But right now, let's start off with some guys that we find the most just overall intriguing. Joe, who are some of your picks?
So it's kind of funny, as I was putting my list together unintentionally, I began to notice that the guys that I listed all have something in common. And what they have in common is that they came to ASU last year, but didn't play or saw very, 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 very limited time. So going through that list, it's Xavier Alford, Ben Coleman, Jake Smith, and Jordan Tyson. Those are ones, again, that all of whom contributed to pretty high levels at other schools, whether it's Alford at USC, he also spent time at Texas, Ben Coleman, of course, at Cal, Jake Smith at Texas primarily because he didn't technically play for USC, and Jordan Tyson at Colorado, as we talked about earlier. So these are guys that have proven it on the field in major conference programs. They're now at Arizona State, but they just didn't get that opportunity either because of eligibility, snafus, or injury issues. They didn't get the opportunity to show that last year, but now they're primed to do it this year. So for me, that definitely catches my attention.
I love that list a lot. And one guy I will add is the defensive tackle, Jacob Kongaika. Obviously, you have the interest of just making that cross rivalry jump from Wildcat to Sun Devil. Obviously, right there, a very smart guy. But I mentioned a tremendous showing of strength, and also he just flashes for that Wildcat defense. Obviously, it's a defense in the last couple of years. It's really kind of remade itself from one of the worst in the conference to a team's strength, and he is kind of in that middle there, and so he has an opportunity, I think, alongside C.J. Fry, Jeff Clark, just guys that can become, maybe you have a high bar with Deshaun Mallory last year. Maybe you don't see too much of a drop off, or you're able to kind of maybe build upon that as a foundation. So I'm really excited to see and intrigued by what Kongaika could happen, could potentially contribute to this defense. Joe, who are some guys that you think are feeling some pressure in this spring session?
So it's funny, when we did our first go around of this recording, the first name on my list was Trenton Bourguet, because I figured, he's going up against a couple of younger quarterbacks, one of whom, in Jaden Rashada, was obviously announced as QB1 last year, but that's no longer a concern. I don't see Bourguet having that level of pressure because Rashada is not in the mix for the spring. However, two guys that come to mind that I believe are under pressure, as we kind of outlined in the defensive preview, are Tate Romney and Caleb McCullough, because, ASU, I'm always a believer that, the coaches aren't going to bring in high caliber experienced starters at a position. And also those players probably won't come to a school when they have that sort of, resume, if there isn't a very realistic chance of them being starters. Now, everybody has to compete, but just the formula of those actions is something that gives me the impression that the ASU coaching staff was looking to upgrade its starting linebackers, both of them, not just one. So, by bringing in Fiaseo and Elliott, and even Crook for that matter, that really, I think, puts a great deal of pressure on Romney and McCullough. And McCullough, I believe, is entering his final year, if I'm not mistaken. Romney is quite younger. He's got a few more years of eligibility. So, again, the writing's on the wall, I think, when you bring more players in like that to that position group, that the pressure's on those returning starters.
I totally agree. And obviously one of my other picks here in that category, kind of similar situation as a guy who was a returning starter, or at least ended the season as such for the Sun Devils, but was also at a position where they added a couple of guys through the portal. So I'm thinking Ed Woods is feeling some pressure, but he's a guy that has seen a lot in his time. So I'm not sure exactly how phased he is, but with LaTerrence Welch and Javon Robinson in that mix, as well as a youngster nipping at his heels in Keith Abney, Ed Woods is going to have some stiff competition. I do think that he's, as he's shown during his career, able to rise to some challenges. So maybe he doesn't necessarily earn a starting job, worst case. But I do think that we will see a lot of Ed Woods and be a contributing member of this defense. But man, just the way he ended last season on kind of an upward ascension, you'd like to see him kind of continue that, and also guys put in that nose to the grindstone and earning some respect as a leader and off the field as well. So it'll be interesting to see how those guys kind of react to a lot of the new blood there. Next category, Joe. Now or never? Who's a guy that needs to make an impact right now?
So I've got a few, and just kind of like as a preface to this, when we're talking about now or never, that can mean a few things. I know in some cases it almost has like a high pressure urgency, these players are near disappointment kind of thing. So some of the guys on this list will be ones that have been around for a while. Maybe they're upperclassmen and just the development hasn't quite gotten to where, it would be expected to be. So it's like, okay, something's got to happen. But also there's that aspect of things of guys where it just legitimately is now or never. You're talking about seniors that might have an opportunity now that they haven't had in the past. And so there's one guy that really fits that mold. Again, not in a negative context, because this is someone that could be a key contributor for ASU. It's Bryce Pierre. He caught 17 passes for 139 yards last year, pretty much like the second or third tight end with Jalen Conyers and Messiah Swinson. So the opportunity is there for him to be the top tight end. We've heard the superlatives from the coaching staff about him being an NFL caliber player. And, he contributes 17 catches, pretty decent for a backup tight end. So this is somebody that, this year could get to that 30, 40 plus reception mark and really make a difference and be an all conference caliber player and possibly go on to play on Sundays, or the development, can stall a little bit and maybe somebody else leapfrogs him, or it's just a position group that doesn't contribute as much as expected. So again, for a guy like Pierre, who's a senior, it just technically is now or never. Other names onto that list, Elijah O'Neal, he's a senior as well. He had 11 tackles and half a sack in 2023. Someone that I think, can really beef those numbers up and be a key contributor on the defensive line. But again, it's his last opportunity. Others who aren't quite in that senior category, but are ones that have been around the college game for a while, and you're just starting to wonder, okay, are these guys going to be contributors? One name I'll put on there, Crew Jackson. He's a redshirt junior. He played in 2 games last year with no statistics. A local recruit, began at Kansas State. He was a decently rated recruit here, went to a good program, came back to Tempe. So there was some, encouragement and intrigue there, just not a lot on the field. So, we'll see. Again, he's at the linebacker group where ASU made a bunch of additions. So the depth battle is just getting tougher and tougher there. Lastly, it's a name that came up from the both of us earlier in the defensive preview, and that's Garrett Stansbury, redshirt junior, 5 tackles in 3 games in 2023. So, with all the additions that they made on the defensive line as well, similar to linebacker, the opportunities are going to be much tougher to grasp.
Yeah, Pierre and Stansbury were the 2 guys on my list. And I think of Stansbury, obviously, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of scholarships right now devoted to the D-line. And so you wonder if there is also the urgency of kind of maybe a numbers crunch there in terms of Garen really needs to kind of start showing some stuff. And it seems like, every camp we were hearing stuff or see stuff out there that leads you to believe that he's going to finally make good on some of these talents that he has. But we'll hopefully see a good showing here for new position coach Deron Reynolds. Kind of to wind things out, Joe, we talked about there's a lot of new faces in this program, a lot of very talented guys on both sides of the ball. Who are some newcomers that you are absolutely most excited to watch in action?
I tried to cut it down. They're the handful on the list just because there are so many newcomers. Some of them are very intriguing and a lot should play key roles, but they're all ones that we've already kind of broken down, so I won't add too much commentary. But Raleek Brown tops the list for me. Cyrus Fiaseo, Keyshawn Elliott at linebacker, really intrigued there. Cole Martin and LaTerrence Welch in the defensive secondary, and then Josh Atkins. He could possibly be the team's starting left tackle. So that's someone that, again, excited to see what he brings and what sort of continuity he might be able to bring to the offensive line.
Yeah, I think a lot of eyes are going to be on Raleek Brown and Cyrus Fiaseo on the defensive side of the ball as well. Sam Levitt is now like even going to have a greater opportunity at quarterback to really kind of to show off what he can do, battling the wily veteran in Trent Bourget. But all told, it's going to be a very interesting month or so, with the kind of culminating in Friday, April 26th spring game. So a lot of battles that we'll definitely be catching you up on as we cover the spring ball week by week over those 15 practices. And before we get you out of here, let's talk to a couple of ASU assistant coaches and get their take on where their position group stands heading into spring, starting with running back coach Shaun Aguano.
Off-season kind of, dwindling to close and like another season getting underway. Did you at least get a chance to, during the off-season, just kind of decompress away from football, get some time with the family and kind of recharge?
Absolutely. We were just on spring break, and so I took my older two to Hawaii. We went back home and had a blast. And my wife had to work with the other two, so she stayed, and she's pretty jealous about that. But for decompression, and now we're ready to pretty much get back to football. You miss that part of it, and so spring ball is coming up, and we're excited for the next 15 practices.
Looking back at last year, though, weird year, obviously. So many things that was kind of thrown at you, the injuries and all the creative things that had to go on. What did you learn from just going through kind of a year so full of just obstacles, hurdles, challenges, but some opportunities as well?
I think for a staff, a new staff coming together and fighting through all of those adversities and working together, I think that strengthens our staff. I think Coach Dillingham did a great job keeping everything together. Making sure that we fight through the adversity at the same time, knowing that this is a rebuilding process for us. So we learn how to work through the adversity. I think that we have a bunch of guys that we feel that are going to be leaders coming up through this, and I thought that our recruiting class in the portal proved to be pretty beneficial for us, because I think we're going to be a lot better team than we were last year. And not when I say better, that is more of the camaraderie with the team, the gel of the team, but also from an athletic standpoint too.
How do you feel like you're a different and better coach now than having gone through those experiences and challenges with mostly a new staff and everything that was kind of thrown at this program?
You learn about your staff. You learn what the strengths and weaknesses, like what every head coach was, and you try to work together as a team, trying to build that cohesiveness. And I thought that Coach Dillingham did a great job working with us together, and I think the staff has got close. We understand each other. We work together on the recruiting process and trying to make Arizona State the best that they can be. And I thought from a learning perspective, I thought we made huge gains in that department.
Scat did just about everything last year. Obviously, what did you kind of jumped out most to you about what you saw from him, and just not just obviously the running and receiving that we saw and expected, but just everything else that was asked of him as the year kind of went the way it did.
Because he's a competitor and he wants to win, and sometimes he got frustrated a little bit, but that's the learning process. How you want to play with passion, and you want to limit your emotion, and so that's things that we're going to work on with him. But I thought he did a great job. That room now is going to be very, very competitive with everybody in that room, and so we're going to see how that plays out over spring ball and then into the fall. But I still think that they work well together, and I'm excited for that room to show what it can do.
Of course, reuniting with DeCarlos, and when he was in there, seemed to be a real difference maker. Unfortunately, just was bad on that injury bug.
Yeah.
Seems healthy and ready to go this year. What is that kind of like 1-2 punch of Scat and DeCarlos going to bring to this offense?
I think I fear for the defensive backs because they're physical running backs, and they don't go down real easy, and so they complement each other well. I think with Sip and Ralik coming in as well, I think they bring a different dimension because of their speed and perimeter ability. I think George Hart brings that steadiness to us, and then I'm excited about the new freshman that's coming in, Jason Brown, because he brings his expertise in the running game, and I think that it's going to be a competitive room, and that just makes us better.
You mentioned Ralik, obviously a guy that's you has some familiarity playing against him, but just the explosiveness and the versatility. What is he going to bring, kind of maybe as a change of pace, with the power and physicality of Scat and DeCarlos versus somebody who can break off big gains like that?
Yeah, and I think you said it right. It's the change of pace. It's the quickness, the perimeter threat, the receiving threat. I think that's what he brings. Just because he's a different back. He's a running back. He's a different back from those two power. Very similar to Sip in the perimeter, and so I'm excited. I'm trying to push Coach Arroyo to put two guys on the field at the same time because I think, from a selfish standpoint, I think our room is filled with athletes that can get the job done, and so I'm just excited to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, speaking of Coach Arroyo, obviously, with his offense, coming in with Kenny and your knowledge as well. What is that the offense going to look like differently from last year to this year in terms of what it asks of its running backs?
I think. When we look at Coach Arroyo's running backs, I think his offense goes through those running backs because they're so much involved with the pass game and the run game, of course, and we want to be dominating the run game, in the play action game and all of that stuff. So I think that our backs are excited because they play a huge part in not only the running game but the passing game, and I feel that it will keep a lot of defenses unbalanced just because of that.
And so if you were to put together a top to-do list for what you want your running backs to do and accomplish over the 15 practices of spring, what's on the top of that list?
Absolutely. It's paying attention to the details, making sure we do the things right all the time. From a professionalism standpoint, I know that they've done a good job, but how professional and how focused can we be at every single practice? And that's huge for us. I'm not worried about the athleticism part. That'll come, and they've worked real hard about it. Now it becomes how do I become graduate level running backs? How well do I understand the defense? How well do I understand what is needing to be done? How well do I understand everybody else's jobs on the field? And just graduate level stuff, but most of all, the attention to detail.
A little bit. When the season ends, you kind of want to get far from the football. Hit that reset button. But you're in a good place now. You got that itch to get to Tuesday, so we're ready to get started.
So it's a full season of being an assistant coach under your belt now. When you kind of have some separation and look back a little bit, what are some kind of the things the big things and lessons and takeaways that you had from that experience?
Yeah, a lot of growth. Experience is really the best teacher. I've just been blessed to have Dwayne Walker be my senior analyst, and having Marvin Lewis with me this past year. It's really, kind of helped me get my train on the tracks, if that makes sense. So going into year 2, I got a lot of focus on, where areas that I need to grow in, what areas that I can focus on, what areas that can help the players from a teaching standpoint, from a progression standpoint. So I just feel overall I got a way better grasp of not only the system, but how to orchestrate, how to structure meetings and stuff like that. So I'm excited to, start year 2 in this system.
Brian Carrington of today were to, give advice to yourself 1 year ago before heading in. What would that wisdom be?
The wisdom is, it's just time. Really just put the time in. Just put a lot of time in. A lot of times from a recruiter to transition into a coach, it's a lot of stuff that you got to kind of put behind you, and that zealous recruiting ability, you got to kind of compartmentalize the recruiting aspect of yourself and kind of give a majority of time towards the coaching aspect of things. So gradually over time, I just kind of fell back in love with the sport, if that makes sense, from a recruiting and marketing standpoint, which I feel like I still have strong suits in, but more so being in love with the coaching side, product development, being on the assembly line, having hands-on, the coaching, the teaching, how guys learn differently, stuff like that is just, is something I'm more zealous to, have those opportunities moving forward.
How do you find that balance? Obviously coming in with a reputation as an ace recruiter and, maintaining that the chops out there, as well as continuing to elevate your role as a coach.
I just feel like it's a lot of stuff from a coaching aspect that I need to learn, or I needed to learn moving forward from last year, and just investing into that and creating zeal for that type of knowledge and that type of thirst, versus my zeal in the past was more so on marketing, more so on strategy, more so on really getting knee deep in relationships. Now in product development, now I'm trying to understand football more conceptually. I'm trying to break down cover 3 schemes, cover 6 schemes, cover 4 schemes, how to improve our system, how to improve the way I teach this system to our players. We got a bunch of new guys in this spring that don't know this system, similar to last year installing this system.
Right.
You look at our room last year, the only one that's still here last year is Ed Woods. We're able to bring in 4 high school cornerbacks, 2 cornerbacks from the portal, so it's all new faces in that room. It's only, 3 guys that are returning in that room, and everybody else is brand new, coming from 2 of them transfer portal guys coming from different systems. So now teaching those guys our system is something I'm just so excited to, really start that process.
And before talking about those, the current guys in that room, Ro Torrance, on the precipice of an NFL career, what are some of the things you saw from him last season, the relationship you guys were able to build, and you kind of elevate him today?
I think Ro is always going to be an intriguing option for NFL teams. Shout out to Pro Day, 6'3", 208 pounds. There's not a lot of guys that have that rare length, to play the position. So I feel like that's something that will automatically get him coveted by NFL teams. And as he starts this NFL journey, it's about staying in the NFL. Everybody preaches NFL means not for long. Now that you have a ticket, to the next level, you'll get a helmet, you'll be in somebody's training camp. Staying in the league is most important. So to recap a college career and you end up any kid in high school right now would say, if I go and I have a decent college career, I'll be at the combine. So just being at a combine from a junior college prospect to get an opportunity in college is such a great achievement. So the opportunity is there for him. I'm excited to see what he does in the future from the NFL standpoint.
You mentioned Ed Woods, obviously a guy who kind of really seemed to blossom down the back half of last year. Keith Abney's a guy who seemed to, really kind of embrace role and had a nice pick near the end of the season. Just like kind of the returning group of corners. We're talking about the new guys. What have you seen from them in terms of now having a year of experience in this system, and you talked about preparing them for spring?
When I got here last year, I was very intrigued, by Ed Woods from a movement skill ability, and just challenging Ed to become heavier, put weight on. When we got here, he was around the 165 range. Was dealt with a lot of soft tissue issues. Now Ed's up to 180, 185, and it's a different caliber of athlete. And I always preach to those guys the best ability is availability. So, Ed Woods, who I feel had a really strong season. I feel like he finished top on our team PFF grade for the entire season. But, I feel like he's taking that next step, and now going from a position to where you got to be a leader of the room and the system and you've played at a high level to where peers in the room respect you from a player standpoint. It's just taking that next step, becoming a leader. And I feel like he's definitely a guy that's going to have an opportunity to play this game at the next level.
And then some of the new guys, Terrence has obviously coming over, playing in the SEC for a while, a former top 200 recruit, I believe. Javen Robinson's a guy who has a familiarity with the scheme. What do you think, just in the kind of without seeing them yet on the practice field, but just, what they've been able to bring early on?
Yeah, I feel like those are guys that are experienced guys that have played college football and been in the college football system, whether we're talking about Terrence Welch coming from LSU or Javen Robinson coming from Washington State. He's obviously a very smart kid. He's familiar with the system, so he's been able to hit the ground running in our walkthroughs. And he's a very smart and competent kid. But he's also similar to Ed Woods for a lot of reasons. He has really good twitch, short space quickness. He's explosive. He's a guy that can probably test in the 4.3 range. So he's a guy that can go. So just having the body types of guys in that room, including Javen and Terrence, that have experience, but you add those guys with the promising freshmen, those guys kind of look like clones in that room, and as far as from an athletic ability standpoint, from a movement skill standpoint. So we've upgraded that room, in my opinion.
So when you look at spring ball, top things on your to-do list, what do you want to see from your group of corners?
I want us to play fast. I want us to play physical, and I want us to be able to take a picture of the offense and just have a better ability to anticipate what the offense is going to give us. If we're in condensed sets, get a little bit more width. Understand that when offenses get in condensed sets, they want to widen you. So just teaching within, whether we're playing cover 3, whether we're playing cover 4, whether we're playing cover 3, just those pre-snap alignments. Because a lot of times last year we kind of beat ourselves pre-snap, and I feel like me and Coach Ward have been harping on alignment, assignment, key read technique, and really just alignment alone. So as we go through walkthroughs this spring, being the second year in the scheme, you can kind of see a lot of guys kind of adapting to the scheme, understanding the scheme conceptually better, and it's just really trying to iron out those details from an alignment standpoint, because once we are able to align to whatever the offense gives us, then we're able to really talk more football and talk some more cool stuff when it comes to the football aspect.
That's going to do it for this episode of Speak of the Devils. I'd like to thank our guests, Shaun Aguano and Brian Carrington. With spring ball fully underway right now, make sure you keep with us on the social media side of things for all the latest updates. On Twitter, you can follow the show at SOTD Podcast, Instagram at Speak of the Devils, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Facebook at facebook.com/SOTD Podcast, and give me a follow at BDenny29.
And you can follow me at Joe Healy 42. Huge shout out and a big thank you to our awesome sponsors, of course, consisting of Jones Auto Group, DevilsDigest.com, Cactus Sports, Burrito Express, Spaghetti Shack, and Sun Devil Family Charities.
as well as the good brand homefieldapparel.com, where you can get 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com by using offer code SOTD23. They just released a brand new ASU snapback hat. It's pretty awesome, as well as 25 other cool ASU items, as well as 180 other schools for all the gift-giving situations in your life. Again, SOTD23 gets you 15% off at Homefield Apparel or homefieldapparel.com. Also, be sure to give us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And Joe and I will be back next week as we recap week 1 of spring ball.